أفضل الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد عليه الصلاة والسلام. Welcome to the second lecture here in this course in Applied Linguistics. In the introductory and first lecture, we have dealt with a number of issues regarding the field of Applied Linguistics. We have actually defined Applied Linguistics. We have categorized the issues that come actually under this field. And we have actually mentioned a number of subfields within the field of Applied Linguistics. Most of them, in fact, for your own benefit later on, inshallah, or all of them can be studied as, they can be your specialization when you want to do master's degree or PhD when you want to pursue your studies, inshallah. So the way I want it actually to be done here in this course is that these can be dealt with as definitions. So I may ask you, please define language testing. What is the definition of applied linguistics? What is the definition of forensic linguistics? What is the definition of lexicography? And so on and so forth. I may also ask you other questions, but you, as a student, your role is to memorize these definitions and also try to analyze what we mean by them. Your role is not just to memorize these actually definitions, but also I want you to go into a higher level of, in fact, analyzing, be able to analyze them and evaluate them, in fact. So in this lecture, we'll be talking, in this second lecture, we'll be talking about issues actually relating to the issues that have been mentioned earlier in the first lecture, and we will try actually to establish a relationship between linguistics here and applied linguistics, because there are two different fields. We have linguistics and we have applied linguistics. In the book here, he is saying actually, Guy Cook, 2003, that it is a difficult relationship. And I would agree that it is such a difficult relationship between these two fields. It is difficult to establish a relationship between them. But anyway, let's start by defining linguistics, as we did actually with applied linguistics. Linguistics, what do we mean by linguistics? Linguistics is the academic discipline concerned with the study of language in general. That's it. So it is just studying language. It is an academic discipline at the first place, which is in fact concerned with the study of language. So language is at the heart of this discipline, and the name comes from it, in fact, linguistics. But unlike applied linguistics, we are not here actually interested in making decisions about the real world or making relation, the study of language in relation to real world activities, or when we make decisions. No, here we study language alone. Here actually our interest, like any discipline, linguistics looks for generalizations, underlying actual appearances, and so on, in some degree is bound to represent an abstract idealization of language rather than the way it is experienced in the real world. He's trying here actually to compare it with applied linguistics. This actually means that when you are actually studying when you are studying linguistics, you are dealing with abstract entities, abstract issues, abstract idealization of language, rather than the way it is experienced in the real world, which is applied linguistics. So here, what we in fact do is that we focus on issues that are not related at all to real world, and we are not actually concerned with making decisions. We are just studying the language itself here, and we want to know how closely the resulting models of language correspond with experience. Will vary considerably, and there are different and opposed schools of linguistics to draw upon. Actually, one influential type of idealization here is that used by generative linguistics, and the most famous guy here who introduced generative linguistics is Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky is a very, very famous guy in linguistics, and you've got to know about this guy. And he introduced this term, generative linguistics, in 1950s onward, which was actually a long time ago. In his view, he said that the proper subject matter, he's talking now about linguistics, not applied linguistics, the proper subject matter of linguistics should be the representation of language in the mind, which is competence, rather than the way in which people actually use language in everyday life. So we have here performance. He is trying to say to us that we've got two things: competence, which is the actual representation of language in the mind, and the way I'm using this language, which is performance. Okay, so what is the subject matter of linguistics? He said should be representation of language in the mind. As a linguist, I should study how language is acquired by the speaker. So I'm looking at biological, psychological issues in which has to do with the actually cognitive processing in the mind here, rather than the way in which people actually use language in everyday life. Actually, Chomsky's claim here is that this internal language is essentially biological rather than social. I'm using language because I have got the capacity, and I'm acquiring or learning language because I've got the capacity, the ability to use language. My mind will help me, not the context that I'm living in. The social context, according to Chomsky, has no effect on the learner of that language. So it is biological. When you are ready to speak the language, you will speak. It is to do with biological issues inside your brain. When your brain is ready to, when your brain is ready to produce language, you will be able to speak it, and is separate from and relatively uninfluenced by, not relatively very small effect, relatively uninfluenced by outside experience. To some degree it is uninfluenced. This is the relatively. To some degree it is uninfluenced by outside experience, which means that the people who are around you they have very, very, very limited effect on you when you learn a language. This is according to Chomsky. So he thinks that if you are ready to learn a language, you will produce it. It is actually to be investigated not through the study of actual language use in context. If you want to investigate language learning, language acquisition, you should not investigate it according to Chomsky through context, when people are speaking together. No. But rather through the consideration of invented sentences, intuitively felt to be acceptable instances of the language. So it is your mind what should be the focus. It is the biological issues, the cognitive processing. When you actually want to investigate this, in fact, issue of language learning or language acquisition, you need to target the biological issues according to Chomsky, rather than the social ones. So here, in fact, we have sociolinguistics. Chomsky linguistics, however, is not the only kind. We have also sociolinguistics. What does this mean? In sociolinguistics, in fact, the focus is very much upon the relationship or the relation between language and society. And as the name suggests, very much upon the relationship between the language and society. Sociolinguistics endeavors to find systematic relationships between social groupings and contexts, and the variable ways in which languages are used. So how these languages are used in these social groups, and it is studying them in context. Also, we have something similar to it, which is functional linguistics. The concern is with language as a means of communication, the purpose it fulfills, and how people actually use their language. In functional linguistics, I'm interested in this particular issue, how people use language and how language is used with communication and the purpose it is actually fulfilling. Recently, in fact, a particularly important development in the investigation of language use has been corpus linguistics, in which vast data banks containing millions of words of actual language use can be searched within seconds. You just put the word, and in the there's something called, I have met something called somebody called Adam Bryan in Australia, and he was the actually he invented a way to search, or he made a program which would enable you to search millions of documents. He kept uploading documents until he has got a very big corpus. It was electronically done, and in that, in fact, the program which he called the concordancer. You can Google it, you can find it in Google. Vast, as we said here, data banks containing millions of words of actual language in use can be searched within seconds. You can find instances or examples of the word use, how language is used, how this word is used in the context, and how these millions of documents that I have used the word, for example, this phrasal verb, and it will give me an indication of how this word is used. To yield what? To yield extensive information about word frequencies and combinations which is not revealed by intuition. So this would actually help you to find words easily and to find new combinations that you may have not actually thought about. These approaches that we have just talked about, the generative linguistics introduced by Chomsky, sociolinguistics, functional linguistics, corpus linguistics, these four branches of linguistics here are, these approaches to linguistic study seem much closer to the reality of experience than Chomsky's, which is generative linguistics. And therefore, functional linguistics, sociolinguistics, corpus linguistics, these are three more relevant to the concerns of applied linguistics. So, functional linguistics, sociolinguistics, corpus linguistics are more related or relevant to the concerns of applied linguistics. Yet, or however, they are abstract in the sense that they detach language from the experience of its use. It's not corpus linguistics, functional linguistics, and sociolinguistics are not studying language in context here, because they detach language from the experience of its use. This is why, this is because their purpose is to describe and explain. I want to know why these actually groups of people are using language in this particular way. My purpose is to describe and explain. That's it. I'm not interested in what, as applied linguistics do or does. I'm not interested in making decisions. I do not want to engage with decision making. The other actually issue which is of really which is relevant to our discussion here of applied linguistics and linguistics is the description versus prescription. Linguists favor description. What is description? Saying what does happen. What is happening here? Somebody who's learning a language and he is using this language in this particular way. He is making mistakes. Why he is making mistakes? For example, when he says or she says he play, instead he plays football. So why he is making this? I need to investigate it, because it is internally here. It is an internal it is something to do with the internal processing or processes that I have, that he or she has in her mind. So over prescription, saying what ought to happen, making rules of grammar, how to actually, so this is applied linguistics, prescription. What ought to happen? Linguistics favor description over prescription. Why? Because linguists' concern is knowledge, actually as an end in itself. And in fact, rather than with action based upon that knowledge, I want to know why this particular person is making mistakes, as we said when producing when speaking, for example, when he or she wants to say something in English, they do not use the proper verb inflections, for example. So, and as a linguist, I'm interested in knowing this. That's it. I don't want to make decision. I don't want to make action. Because making actions is based on that knowledge that I have, is the task of the applied linguist. So here we can say that in fact prescription is a social phenomenon. Prescription in fact is something that applied linguist would be interested in fact, because linguists are concerned with the description, saying what does happen. So a prescription here is a social phenomenon, and it cannot be legitimately encountered by description, as we have actually just mentioned. Another actually important issue here, because we are dealing with language, we have got in fact to say something about the language that we are studying. We are studying now English, and what is this language actually is doing, and what effect does it have on the world that we are living in. The growth of English, I may ask you, like, for example, a question: how has the growth of English affected other languages? We have, let's have this brief introduction about English. 400 million or so first language speakers of English. Very actually big number, and it is increasing. Why? You will see now why. And over 1 billion where it is the official language of education, business, as we said, the internet, the actually language of trade, as we said, business, and also the language of, in fact, the science now. Science has become, most of the papers, journals that are published around the world are published in English. The role of other international languages, such as French or Russian, has diminished drastically. English is growing and these actual languages are declining. Why? Because English has dominated around the world, is dominant, and has been actually the second or first language in most of the countries of the world because of colonization and other actually important issues. But what has this done to other languages? Let's take, for example, French. French is no longer the international language of air traffic control or dominant in diplomacy. This is how English has affected French. Also, German and Russian, how English has affected, how has the growth of English affected German and Russian? They are now no longer internationally necessary for scientific study. You can carry out a research without knowing these languages. You can read research without knowing these languages. You can be up to date in your field without knowing these languages. Actually, this tells us that the influence of English is great, and it can be seen in films. Look at the movies now. Most of them are English. Television programs, advertisements, and the internet. Even in the language, I mean, even in the countries where English is not the first language, you can see movies in English. You can see advertisements in English. Internet, which has actually most of the websites are in English now. The teaching and learning of English has generated tremendous personal, political, academic and commercial interest, because English has become dominant in the world. People has actually to learn it, because it is the language of Facebook. It is the language of, for example, Instagram, Twitter. You've got to learn it. Even the icons, sometimes they allow you to write in Arabic, but the icons are actually in English. The name of the icons, or when you click on one item here and there, it is written in English. Most of the things that we do actually are in English. So, if you are interested in trade, if you are interested in making business, deal with somebody who is over there at the other parts in the world, you will actually need to have English in your communication. You need to communicate with him or her by using English. This actually reveals to us that English has become a dominant language in the world. This is the end of this actually lecture. I thank you very much for your for listening to this lecture, and I wish you all the best. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.